directly affected by Act 10 as well. So, you know, it was handled in different ways, and what we're seeing is a patchwork statewide, but the legislature was included in that. But again, I'm not using that as something to sell Act 10. I just believe that the final piece of collective bargaining was put in place in 1971 by a legislature. Oh, by the way, Fred Risser was in the Senate at the time, you know? So it's not ancient history, and it's not something that was written in the Constitution, and it's not a human right. It was a right granted by the Wisconsin State Legislature. And what we had seen for many, many years is that the table continued to be tipped away from the taxpayer and more towards the public employee unions. And we were aware of this, and we knew this was going on. And as the deferred comp pot, which is the dollars that are set aside to actually fund the increase that are negotiated between the Secretary of Employee Relations and the state unions, we just said, we don't know how long this can go on. Further complicated by WEA Trust, that insurance program that 2/3 of all schools throughout the state had this sweetheart deal with. And we knew that was going on. And we knew it was going on, and the Democrats knew it was going on. And I think, I still look back on this now, and as painful as it's been for families that were involved in this, and they're still ticked off at me, and I see them every day on the street, or filling up my vehicle with gas, or wherever I'm at the grocery store. I mean, they were directly affected. You know what? I understand that anger. Because if they lost $200, $300 out of their check, I mean, that had a direct effect on them. Okay? But I also talked to a group of people out there in Wisconsin that say, listen, I've been doing this for a long time. You know? Why do I have to pay for my retirement and put dollars into a 401k and also do it for the public employee that lives right next door to me? You know?
You did it because you wanted to beat Obama.
That's why. I mean,
Fox News.
So I still feel strong that
We did this so we could beat Obama.
we did the right thing, and that ultimately we'd be okay.
Well, let's hear some truth then.
Okay.
Yes, like yes, just be
All
quiet.
right. So it is, yeah, my wife's a high school counselor, and she was directly affected, got a layoff slip, the whole thing. And I have many friends that were teachers who are very upset with me, won't talk to me. So
But as a legislator,
it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing.
You are paid what?
Yeah, the legislator already paid a portion of their health care depending on the product that they selected.
And
it also, they
like
pulled out
everybody
part
else?
for retirement as well.
Are you putting in 5.9%?
We were directly affected by Act 10.
Okay, I just want to make sure it's the same to everybody.
And everyone in the legislature, these staff people, everyone.
Good.
Okay. Kurt Lund?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
What is your position on the Citizens United decision of the U.S. Supreme Court and the influence of corporate money in government? Specifically, do you believe that corporations should have constitutional rights, and do you believe that spending money should be protected as a form of speech under the First Amendment?
Well, I'm not going to get into the Supreme Court case. I mean, the Supreme Court ruled they were very, very specific in saying, listen, you cannot limit a corporation's ability to weigh in on, political speech. So, I mean, that's basically what the majority said.
What
in the
your
Supreme
position
Court.
is on that ruling.
I know what the rule is.
Wait a minute. I mean, I'm not going to weigh in on that because the Supreme Court's called. I mean, that's the reality of what we have right
So
now.
you don't have a
and that's
position
why
on it?
You're our representative. We want to know what you think about that.
That's why there's millions of dollars that are being spent. I mean, what I say about it, I'm not a Supreme Court justice.
But
so
we want
Wisconsin
to know
Cheryl weighs
what
in on that.
you feel about that ruling, sir.
Well, it goes back to the Herb Kohl rule. As long as Herb Kohl never had to raise a dollar because he's a multimillionaire and could spend as much money as he wanted, that was protected by the First Amendment because that was Herb Kohl's deal. He could spend as much of his own personal money because he was protected by the Constitution. And until you eliminate that provision, until you figure out a way to say that Herb Kohl, you can't use your own money, Herb, to run for office because you're no longer protected by the First Amendment, then the rest of these arguments fall by the wayside. Until you figure that out, you cannot curtail this based on what the Supreme Court said.
Well, the Walker administration just
Does
Just
it, ma'am,
cancel.
I'm not gonna recognize you because I haven't recognized you, and I don't know if you have a slip here or not.
I do.
But, you know, if you're trying to get me to say that there's an evil part of corporate money in politics and that the union money in politics isn't the same, no, it's two
No, I
sides
think
voting
he
out
asked what your opinion
I'm-
on the ruling is.
on independent
Your
spending.
personal
I'm not a
opinion.
constitutional attorney.
The voters in Wisconsin are weighing in on this issue. West Allis in this last election
We
voted
passed-
overwhelmingly to denounce that Supreme Court decision, and I just want to know what your feeling is. You represent us. We're entitled to know what you feel about it.
If there was some way, and I'm not a constitutional attorney, I have a bachelor's degree from Oshkosh, I'm not going to sit here
Do you not understand?
and argue the U.S. Supreme Court ruling. All I'm going to tell you is I'm well aware that there's a ton of corporate money and a ton of union money in
And
politics.
you have no opinion
And
on
it's
that.
making its way into the process through independent expenditures. Another problem we have, independent expenditures. I mean, just turn on your TV.
So
I mean,
you
that's a
dis-
whole
so you
different
disagree
facet
with the
of
ruling?
this that no one could have seen in Wisconsin politics.
So you agree with the ruling?
I believe that, you know, Justice Roberts and the majority said it was a pretty strong decision. That
I'm sure
said,
everyone in
that
this
said the
room
court-
has an opinion on it. You do not have an opinion on it?
yeah, I do. I mean, I think that the reality is that corporations and unions spend a lot of money on independent expenditures.
You're not answering his question.
No, I am. I don't know what you want. I don't know what you want. Okay. Lee? Dot.
Yeah,
Dot?
I have a non-confrontational question. Can't believe I said that. It's a question about the 11-13 budget. I'm working on a little analysis of that budget, and what I come across is that there were a whole bunch of healthcare cuts, and that basically that is their play. And I understand that the list of cuts that the Republican budget has in it don't necessarily stand. The total may have to stand because you can't balance it without it. But that you have to negotiate with the feds on certain health issues, whether or not you can or can't do them. And it's going back and forth between the feds and the legislative bureau and back, you know, to determine what can stay and what can't.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same issue that we deal with on a regular basis. It is that the state legislature needs to go to the federal government, and if you're going to create a program under Medicare or Medicaid, you need to get that federal waiver. And that also means that there's strings attached. And that was made very clear to Governor Walker's administration in the area of family care, where we had gotten to the point where we were looking at our revenues. Governor signs the budget into law. We start looking at our revenues, and we start to see an expansion under family care. An expansion that we don't have the cash for. We just cannot afford it. Okay? So what we did was we had the finance committee go in and put a cap on how many people could be in there and created a waiting list. Okay? And then also said this will not be expanded to any other counties throughout the state. Okay? In the discussions with the federal government about that, the feds came back and said, no, Wisconsin legislature, you can't put a cap on family care. Okay? We said we can't afford, we don't know where to pay for it. They said, we don't know how you're going to pay for it either, but you can't do it. And then they also said you can't expand it to other counties. Well, that's still kind of a decision that's up in the air, because the way we worded it and what Governor Walker signed into law when he repealed the cap was, if there is an expansion in other counties, you've got to come back to the legislature. We're discussing whether that's through the finance committee or the full legislature, but we got to come back if you're going to expand to other counties. But the problem is we're not cash, and the feds are sending enough money to fund the program.
I understand our ministers is also priorities of where you take the money or where you get it. But where does it stand? I mean, are we going to have, when is there going to be a final budget for 12-13?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the ongoing discussion we're having right now. The budget per se is balanced through the end of the calendar year, but then once you move beyond December, you know, now you're going to look at your revenues again and see what the projections are. Go to the finance committee along with the fiscal bureau and say, okay, where are we at? Do we have to make adjustments? Or we find ourselves in a situation where we're going to have a money repair bill? Or I don't see that happening, quite honestly, but what I do see is that the next budget is going to be very, very difficult to kind of keep a lid on.
Who's the best place
Health and Human Services has their own websites, but I mean, if there's like a day-to-day change, or if there's something,
Not quite that.
yeah, I mean, I think it's something that's high profile that, you know, either through the legislative offices or
Joint
or
finance.
certainly call us, yeah, I mean, there's certainly information available.
Joint finance, would they be a resource?
Yeah, I don't expect the Joint Finance Committee to convene anytime before June 5th, but, you know, that's where the work would be done on the issue, that's for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Peter Hammond?
I'm
Hammond?
going to go in a totally different direction here.
Okay,
I run a full-time taxidermy studio, that's how I make my living for the last 15 years.
okay,
White-tailed deer happen to be a major portion of my income. I want to applaud Scott Walker and whoever else was behind the decision to bring Dr. James Kroll in to look at our structure of deer hunting in this state. My question is, reading several articles in the last couple of weeks, the decision makers in the DNR seem to be very put off by the fact that Dr. Kroll is going in a different direction of thinking than what they are. And I just wonder, is there going to be any type of push from anybody to try to encourage the DNR to maybe go down a different road, possibly like the one he's suggestion, because our structure of deer season, I think anybody that deer hunts would agree, has gone from a culture of hunting to a culture of killing. And it affects a lot of people, not only myself, but processors, hotel owners, grocery stores, everything. And I think most deer hunters would welcome a change. And so that's my question, and the only other comment I have, as a small business person for 15 years, I pay 100% of my health insurance, and I can't afford to have a retirement plan.
okay, thank you, sir. Yeah, just a couple comments. First of all, on the deer stuff. You know, when CWD kind of caught the legislature off guard, so we did kind of move forward with a bunch of what I would call hodgepodge decisions. Most of them were bipartisan, and they were all bipartisan. In that, I think we struggled. There was, you know, almost kind of a recoil from it. First in disbelief, and then, you know, as that continued, it kind of perpetuates itself. We put more and more revenue into a plan to try and curtail it. That certainly had an effect. The elimination of, for all intents and purposes, a 9-day season because there's just no deer north of Highway 29 has had a huge effect, I think, on, you know, the deer harvest every year. And then below that, you know better than any, being around here, I mean, it seems to be kind of a hit and miss thing as to whether or not the deer herd is flourishing in one county or is, you know, just non-existent in others. You know, some of what Governor Walker and Secretary Stepp kind of agreed on and came to the legislature with was to say, let's start all over. Let's look at the state as a whole. Let's look at, you know, what we can do to bolster this $5 billion industry. And, you know, we need some help, though. We can't do it internally. We're not going to do it with the same people that have been developing the programs. And, you know, that's when you brought in Dr. Deere, and Kroll has been wonderful, I think, in his first assessment of what Wisconsin was, where has it been for the last couple of seasons, and then, you know, what can you do to improve the herd and make sure that there are some